Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 61 of Your Birth Bestie podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about the signs of preterm labor and how to tell the difference between false contractions and actual labor. With my second pregnancy, I was so over being pregnant at 39 weeks, probably much before then. So when I started contracting and keeping track on my contraction timer app, they were every 2 to 3 minutes or so. They lasted about 12 hours. And throughout that time, my app kept telling me to go to the hospital. They were not painful, and I was able to go about my normal day, but I for sure thought that it was the start of labor. I then went to bed that night thinking, I might get a few hours of sleep. I had childcare situated with my first, and I ended up sleeping straight throughout the night, no contractions when I woke up. And it was such a mind game and honestly a huge disappointment at that point. And my daughter wasn't even born, for like a week later. So let's get into preterm labor as well as how to tell the difference in these kinds of situations between false contractions and actual labor. Hey there, I'm Beth Connors, a midwife and mom of two, but also your birth bestie. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into everything you need to feel confident, prepared, and in control, from baby bump to delivery room, from practical tips to personal stories. We'll cover it all so you know exactly what to expect every step of the way. Let's get into it. So preterm labor is when you go into labor and start having contractions before 37 weeks of pregnancy, because that 37-week mark is when you're considered term. Your baby is fully developed at this point and can breathe on their own outside of the womb. So anything potentially before 37 weeks could maybe be a sign for concern. Some moms have all preterm deliveries, where others are first-time moms and have no idea what to expect and are nervous not knowing how to tell the difference between preterm labor and maybe something else. This is why I wanted to talk about the signs of preterm labor and then also knowing when it is typically a good time to seek medical attention in these situations. But again, it is case by case, and there are other things to consider sometimes. So always being in communication with your provider is a good idea. And also knowing that even if you had a preterm delivery, doesn't mean that your subsequent pregnancies are going to be delivered preterm. And just because you had a full-term pregnancy before doesn't mean that you won't have a preterm baby. So something that everybody should really be counseled about and have information about during their pregnancy to look out for. But what happens in preterm labor are regular contractions, which are usually more than 6 contractions per hour, and they do not go away. I typically tell moms, if you are noticing more regular contractions, try to drink a glass of water, lie down on your side, and try to rest to see if these contractions go away. And if they don't, this could be a sign that you might be in preterm labor. Low back pain and pressure or cramping in the pelvis can also be a sign of preterm labor, and this pain will usually come and go as baby is pushing down with those contractions. You may also notice a change in vaginal discharge that can increase suddenly or change in consistency. If you are bleeding, this should definitely be reported to your provider right away as well. So these signs can vary, and some may experience different symptoms, but always trusting your instincts and consulting with your provider if you do notice anything unusual. And then the next thing that I wanted to talk about is really the difference between those Braxton Hicks contractions or practice contractions and then real, actual labor contractions. And this is a question that moms ask all of the time, and they are unsure if they will know when it's the real deal or not. And if you've never had a baby before, or you have never felt contractions before, if maybe you had a C-section with your other babies, it's a valid question, but usually you can tell when things are starting and it's the real deal. It's one of those things where you have to just trust me that you will know when something is changing, but of course it is also great to be prepared and know what to expect and hopefully decrease some of your anxiety or fears about, that beginning moments of labor. And as a side note, I do want to mention that I am one of the exceptions, kind of in regards to textbook definitions of labor, which is why I also really prioritize individualized care and listening to the mom, first of all, is because for both of my pregnancies, I did not feel contractions, but I was found to be 6 to 7 centimeters dilated at just random prenatal appointments where I agreed to a cervical check. right around my due date. The first time it was 39 and 6, and then the second time it was 40 weeks on the dot. The textbook definition of active labor means that, active labor is starting at 6 centimeters. And this is when things usually start to get pretty intense and more consistent. But for me, if I was 6 to 7 centimeters dilated randomly at a clinic appointment, I was just hanging out in active labor, quote unquote active labor, for who knows how long. With my first, my midwife definitely kind of freaked out. It was more chaotic, basically had me rushed to labor and delivery to have my baby. Even though I had no idea that I was contracting, I was in zero pain. And that was definitely the first mistake of that birth experience, just agreeing to that and agreeing to go over to labor and delivery when, sure, I was in active labor, being 6 centimeters dilated, but I also was not feeling a single thing whatsoever. And then the second time, the same thing happened. I was dilated, pretty far without any signs. So I just wanted to share that personal background because even being 6 or 7 centimeters dilated, like in my case, I wasn't quote unquote in labor, and I should have just waited for my body to kick into labor on its own. But it's just a good example when I talk about practice contractions and active labor. It's not simply black and white. There is some individual assessment that should be done and that is helpful for you to be aware of as well. So let's break down the differences between the practice Braxton Hicks contractions and then labor contractions. So Braxton Hicks contractions are irregular or come and go without a regular pattern or time frame. They're usually pretty mild and don't increase in intensity over time. They can go away, or you might feel relief as you are moving around, changing positions. Even if you drink a glass of water and you're staying hydrated, this can help them go away as well. And usually when you have Braxton Hicks, it's more in the front of your belly and you feel that hardening and maybe a little bit of discomfort, but they're not particularly painful. And that is a Braxton Hicks contraction. And usually the more babies that you have, the earlier those Braxton Hicks contractions occur. So it's not unusual if it's your second or third pregnancy to experience those a little bit sooner than your first pregnancy. And then true labor contractions, when it's the real deal, are when contractions come in a regular pattern or regular interval that gradually becomes closer and closer together. You might start out contracting every 10 or 15 minutes, and then it gradually becomes 8 minutes, and then every 6 minutes. And then typically the goal is usually shooting for contractions about every 2 to 3 minutes. And that's when your uterus is having those really strong contractions, they're frequent, and they're able to make cervical change, which is the goal of true labor contractions. Again, this is just a guideline, and everybody's body is different. I have had a client have contractions every 8 minutes, and she progressed naturally in labor without any issues, which isn't typically the case, but it's very interesting just to know that you don't have to have contractions every 2 to 3 minutes in order to make cervical change in order to have your baby. This woman was contracting every 8 minutes, very strong contractions, and she had her baby naturally, and that worked out great for her. The intensity of the contractions will also grow over time and become more uncomfortable and harder to distract yourself through. This is where practicing mindset comes into play and having a pain management plan and supportive birth team to help you through these peak labor contractions. Also, regardless of changing positions or activity, the contractions still come on a regular basis. Labor contractions also often start in the back and then they move to the front of the belly. So that is a slight difference as well. That is sometimes hard to notice, but something to note as well. Overall, my biggest tip if you are unsure is to start out drinking water, lie down, and if the contractions ease off a bit, they're probably Braxton Hicks contractions. But if they get more intense and they stay frequent, it might be actual labor. And what I didn't mention before too is if you were to get into the bath, take a warm bath and get some relief there, sometimes that can help too with those Braxton Hicks contractions and getting some relief from those. But typically real labor contractions wouldn't go away with, simply getting into the tub. It would continue to intensify and get stronger and closer together. So let's say that you are unsure, or you want to update your provider of your labor status if this is happening to you, here is a list of guidelines that can help you know when to call your healthcare provider. If you have regular contractions every 10 minutes or more often than that in 1 hour, if you experience any fluid leakage, which could indicate that your water might have broken, if you have severe pain or cramping that does not go away, or if you have any vaginal bleeding or spotting that you notice. By calling your doctor, they can help you guide you through these situations. Or as a birth doula, I am more than happy to help moms navigate this when they are feeling, unsure and help them create a plan to move forward. I am also available to chat with moms over Zoom virtually, one-on-one, help you have an individualized plan to answer any questions or concerns that come up with handling these stages of labor or birth planning, pregnancy guidance, just planning for your prenatal visits and debriefing your prenatal visits, what to ask your provider, things like that. And really whatever else you might be looking for further support in pregnancy or as you're preparing for birth. So if you are interested in something like that, getting a second opinion, wanting to just pick my brain, head over to my website at bethconnors.com/contact, and you can fill out an inquiry form, and then I will just get in touch with you to schedule that call. You can also email me at hello@bethconnors.com or message me on Instagram, whichever is easiest for you to get a hold of me, to get your questions answered and really be sure that you're having an informed experience, you feel confident going in, and you really just don't have any questions left. They're all answered and you feel good about your plan. And then in general, please keep those guidelines that I mentioned in mind about, preterm labor, about the difference between Braxton Hicks contractions and actual contractions. Keep those guidelines in mind, but most importantly, stay in tune with your body. You know it best, and any concerns should be addressed with your healthcare provider. Thank you so much for joining me today on Your Birth Bestie podcast. Understanding the signs of preterm labor and differentiating between practice contractions and actual labor contractions can empower you to make informed decisions during your pregnancy. Remember that you are never alone in this journey. There is support out there to help you through these stages and all of these decisions. And if you found this episode helpful, I would love it if you would subscribe to the show and leave a review. It is the best way to support the show and to help other moms find this helpful information too. Thank you again for tuning in, and I will be back here next Tuesday with another episode. Bye, everyone.